That's thank you. So, friends, good morning.
Good morning.
I was asked to say one or two things by Liz this morning, so I asked her how much would I get paid, and when she told me, I said, "Well, I would just say good morning and goodbye." Yeah. Um, this is obviously a very important topic, and um, so why don't I start with the first slide here, the pupil of the eye. Baha'u'llah Abdul Baha, moreover, has said once compared the colored people to the black pupil of the eye surrounded by the white. In this black pupil is seen the reflection of that which is before it, and through it the light of the spirit shineth forth. And so the pupil of the eye, I think, to being a person of color is necessary, but it is not sufficient. And one has to consider the pupil of the eye in the context, at least in these United States, in the context of the baneful evil of racism, which has sought to retard the very spirit of people of color. And so, as Buck said, what is required is a spiritual reorientation. So, in my estimation, that this pupil of the eye, as a metaphor, requires two things. Uh, um, it requires an unyielding commitment to the oneness of humanity, which is, of course, the core principle of the Baha'i faith. And second, it requires servitude, action. And so, with that in mind, one such person that is a clear model of the being a pupil of the eye is Sadie Oglesby, referred to as the maid servant of God. And so I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about Mrs. Oglesby. Uh, she was born Sadie E.J. Schenkel. She was born in Concord, North Carolina, here from the Tar Heel State. And she was a nurse at the Pigford Sanitarium in Southern Pines. Uh, uh, Oddly enough, when you think about Southern Pines in 2021. She was married. She got married to Mabry Oglesby. They got married in D.C. October 17th, 1901. So she was a nurse by profession. In fact, on March 26, 1908, the New York Nurses Training School opened, and it was done in connection with the Plymouth Hospital in Boston. It was a new profession then in Boston. And she passed in February of 56 in Boston. So Sadie Oglesby, she was taught the faith by Holland and Grace Ober, and it just goes to show the powerful force of example. She had commented that if it had not been that if it had been that I found them off duty once, we would have turned our faces in another direction. We were guilty of looking for shortcomings, but we have never seen them off duty with us or anybody else. So they were the ones who taught Sadie Oglesby the faith. Um, and this quote here from Shoghi Effendi: when our Baha'is can hold up a light like that, that will draw souls from darkness against their wills, then that is the Baha'i light. She's had a very distinguished service towards the faith. She encountered the faith in 1913. The records I saw, I've seen 1914 and 1917. I've I've seen 17 more than I have 14, so that's why I have 17. In 17, she became a member of the Baha'i faith. In 1921, she was involved in the planning of the Race Amnesty Conference with Louis Gregg and Agnes Parson in DC. She was summoned to the Holy Land in 1924, and her distinguished service. She was in 1927. She was the third African American and the first African American woman, along with her daughter Bertha, to go on pilgrimage. The first, of course, was in 1898. Robert Turner, who was the first African American Baha'i in the United States, and again in a second, 1911, Louis Gregory. And of course, they met Abdul Baha at that time. And her visit on pilgrimage in 1927, she was the first African American pilgrim to meet with the beloved guardian. Um, Here she is on the Earl Point tour. She served on the Boston Spiritual Assembly, and this photo, of course, is from 1939. This was her note card from when she visited the Holy Land in 1924, um, and um, and what's that? It says visited Holy Land in 1924, at which time Shoghi Effendi repeatedly stressed that I should teach the believers of America upon the need of racial amity between the whites and blacks. Um, and that was from her card, a part of a card, anyway, the second page of a card that she did. Um, well, Abdul Baha, this was a quote from Abdul Baha. Can somebody read that? I know you get tired of hearing me talk. Can somebody read this?
And Abdu'l-Baha tells us, O loved handmaidens of God, consider not your present merits and capacities. Rather, fix your gaze on the favors and confirmations of the Blessed Beauty, because his everlasting grace will make of the insignificant plant a blessed tree, will turn the mirage into cool water and wine, will cause the forsaken atom to become the very essence of being, the puny one, erudite in the school of knowledge. Verily, my Lord is powerful over all things. This is from Sadie's Pilgrim Notes.
Yes.
He, the guardian, Shoghi Effendi, said, when I return to America, I should seek no rest, but be constant and urgent, that the importance of this matter should be understood by the friends, that I should be fearless and compelling, I expressed my great sorrow to him and told him I was quite unprepared, unqualified for the work he wished me to do. I said to him, I have no strength or importance in America. I am so sorry.
And we know that she was a giant. Um, she was a fearless advocate for race unity. Um, she, in fact, she actually embraced the core activities of the current plans in ways we could not have imagined. For example, she taught children's classes. Um, um, look at these precious souls. So she taught children's classes. She was a fearless teacher, fearless teacher. Um, and it talks about in 1943 that she began a series of talks plus chaired the fourth Bahari sponsored public health conference for interracial harmony and peace. Um, so she gave firesides. She had devotionals. I mean, she did it all. So if we look at the current um, plan, she would have been a shining star. Um, and so Sadie Oglesby, she was such a radiant light, and she represented the pupil of the eye in the way that I think that Abdul Baha uh, elevated people of color and Baha'u'llah, of course. So that's just inkling into the life of Sadie Oglesby. I tried to stay within the 2 minute time period that Miss Allen gave me, but she was really a dear soul.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful. Um, I love those pictures. They're so clear, and just the notes, the historical notes, were very inspiring as well. So thank you so much
Yeah.
for joining us and sharing some of the life of Sadie Oglesby. I think we're already grateful here for that.
Yeah, and of course, we need not wait until February to talk about these dear souls. There are numerous people of color who were outstanding giants that we hope to hear about more often.
Mhm. That's a really great idea. Mini presentations
Yeah.
on Black Baha'is. Chuck, you had a question before we move to the main presentation?
Yes, if it's okay, Liz, I just wanted to ask Harvey. I had never seen that photograph of Sadie with the Boston LSA. I guess that's who it is. And I love to analyze photographs and to look at them. And I know Derek Smith also does this, but it's very interesting to see how they set up that assembly and how the men are in the center, the white men are in the center of the picture, kind of holding the center, and the women surround them. And Sadie's kind of put off in the corner in the back, and it's just, there's a lot to be said about how that picture was put together. But the question I really had is 1914, and this partially comes from watching the PBS series now that's on the Black Church that some of us have been watching. What was it for a Black woman at that point in 1914 to leave the church and embrace the faith? What kind of a step was that for her? What kind of a risk was that for her?
It was an act of God. I mean, I'm partly being facetious, but for, and the fact that she was taught by white folk. Her family, the Schenkel family, which she married into, they were well off, so to speak. And her father left her the house in Boston, and that's why she moved to Boston. So she had means, but you're right. When you look at the early 1900s and just the evil of racism, and to what does it take to pierce that veil, this double consciousness, so to speak, of being a person of color and living in two worlds, the white world and your own world. But I think that Louis Gregory did it in a marvelous way. The I think, when Buck talks about this spiritual reorientation, I think that that's the driving force. One of those. Um, I mean, we don't understand this spiritual force, but I think that Sadie Oglesby, Louis Gregory, Elsie Austin. I mean, Elsie Austin, she was going to become an agnostic because she was so dismayed by racism. And then, of course, she became a Knight of Baha'u'llah and everything else, and gave her life to the faith. So I think that I think that's an excellent question, and I think that should be a constant source of reflection for us, because that was in the early 1900s, and relatively speaking, how much easier we have it now compared to the lynchings, etc. But ours is a different kind of challenge. And being a pupil of the eye. But again, I think being a person of color is necessary, but it's not sufficient. I think that one has to be a Sadie Oglesby or Louis Gregory, or at least strive for that. And so I think it really is all about um, uh, being connected spiritually, the spiritual reorientation of oneself. And because it takes risk to step out there and do those types of things. Yeah, that's a good question. And when we think about the challenges of today, if we think about the context in which these folks gave their all, Louis Gregory again, I mean, he gave up his profession and everything to serve the faith, to teach, and they all focus on the oneness of humanity, the oneness.
Thank you. Are there any other questions about the presentation before we move on?
Or even not questions, but comments
Yeah, comments.
about Sadie Oglesby. And you don't have to be shy.
Hey, Harvey? Harvey,
Yes.
could you put that slide back up there where you talked about if the Obers had been off duty even once, she would have left? She would have turned in another direction. That's it. Thank you.
Mhm. Yeah, were you going to say something about it?
I just thought it was important, and I wanted to read that last part there. If they had not remained in Boston until my husband and myself were strong enough to turn our eyes towards God, I assure you, dear souls, we still would have been looking in the dark. I just wanted to understand the role that the Obers played. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's an important point, because people see us, and like they said, I assure you, dear soul, we would have been looking in the uh, dark, and they admit that they were guilty of looking for shortcomings. But I think that's the way people are.
Thank
Uh,
you.
but yeah,
I think the learning from that is what Shoghi Effendi said, for us to be perseverant, and how we can. Now you've taken away the screen, so I can't say the words,
Oh.
but that's fine. But Shoghi Effendi then directed us that we all need to be like that. When our Baha'is can hold up a light like that, that will draw souls from darkness against their wills. Then that is the Baha'i light. And I think, to me as a Baha'i, that's the challenge that I must work on daily, so that I can be that light.
mhm.
And then a question I have, because I too have been watching that PBS series that Louis Gates has been doing on the Black church. And I'm a question I've had is, what is it that we can learn as Baha'is from that to teach present day African Americans, that so that they're attracted to the faith, maybe a step beyond having that Baha'i light? Because anyway, that's a question that I've had, and I think that's a challenge for us, especially as white Baha'is. And I am around a lot of Baha'i or African Americans, and have attended church, and it's being a Mennonite girl, growing up in a pretty much structured, very subdued type of worship service. Those worship services can be really, really powerful. Kind of like that, we have come to sing praises to our Lord, but look what it does to our spirit when we have that kind of energy going. So anyway, I just come to appreciate that.
Yeah,
But I think it's a challenge for us to know how we can teach. Anyway.
yeah. We talk about that time in the early 1900s, but for Sadie Oglesby and her husband Marbury, and it was a time of challenge for the Grace and Holland Oprah as well. That these white folks were engaging these black folks.
Mm.
I mean, that wasn't something that was looked upon favorably back then. So I think that they, again, they had this spiritual reorientation on both sides of the fence, so to speak. And I think it's not that complicated, really. I think it's just a matter of acting. I think it's just that simple. I mean, and not only for white folks, but for people. I mean, how many opportunities do we pass up daily to teach somebody the faith, to be of service? because we know that that core principle of the faith is the oneness of um, humanity. So I I think we have to be willing to take risk uh, um, and just be like Nike and just do it.
The very last paragraph of Sadie's address, she addresses this a very question. It's very, very powerful. And she talks about, you know, how we must burn away every, with this love that Shoghi Effendi was expressing, burn away every vestige of self. So only the will of God remains, and that this love will come out just like her teachers of Ober. And maybe you can, is it possible for you to put that paragraph up, the very last one from the address, from Sadie Oglesby address? I do have it myself, but anyways, it's very powerful, the way she ended her speech, what we must do in order to be this radiant light that will attract all people, but particularly African American friends in the United States.
Mhm. Yeah, I think Liz is going to get into that.
Oh, okay, but it's wonderful to read.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. Kathy, were you gonna say something?
Well, it's just interesting to me that here is an African-American woman, and we know that the experience of African-American women in some ways was quite different than the experience of African-American men from slavery time on. And they're still bearing the brunt of, for example, this pandemic today. African-American women who also have childcare responsibilities. But to think that this was a time when women were not allowed to vote, white women were allowed to vote in 1919, but Black women were not given the right to vote until 1965 with the Voting Rights Act. So it's just astonishing that she blazed through, regardless of all the social issues going on. And they were impacting her, I'm sure. And despite those social negative forces designed to hold back people of color, she just stepped right up and was marching to a different drummer. And that drummer was a very spiritual one. I think she did some very bold and courageous, she did some very courageous actions. To see this one very small framed African-American woman in the back row of the picture of that assembly, and she looks so diminutive, and yet Shoghi Effendi picked her to be the communicator of his desires and wishes to address racial unity in America before he wrote The Advent of Divine Justice. What a wonderful thing to be such an instrument.
Yes, yes, yes. And you and again, if there are models, Sadie Oglesby, Elsie Austin, Matthew Bullock, those folks who left, who resigned from the National Spiritual Assembly to go and be part of the 10-year plan, the 10 Crusades. So, yeah, I mean, just to put oneself back there in that time period and to become these giants, to help usher in a new humanity, it really is quite phenomenal.
Yeah, it's interesting that it was her rather than her husband that Shoghi Effendi really charged to bring the message back to the believers, because her husband was, as she's expressed, more uh, mm, spoke up more. Apparently, he mm,
He was more persistent.
with the friends, how that they were racist, and he spoke up, and she was kind of trying to gloss it over, but Shoghi Fendi said, "Your husband is right," but then she really is the one who stood up. It seems like probably together they were doing it, but she was the one who gave the address and like you say, such service that she brought. So it's interesting how that worked out.
Yeah, and I would think that they had more to do with accompanying one another back in the time. So I don't think you could have had one without having the other, because yeah, a powerful song. I'm sorry, Liz. Go ahead, please.
No, not at all. I'm glad that we're having this conversation. Should we go ahead and move on? Is
Yeah.
everyone comfortable with that? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So as you all know, we've been studying the address now, and this is the third month, so the third session that we've been studying it. So we're going to start where we left off. And what I would like would be to have 3 readers. And during the presentation, I'm also going to bring in some of an excerpt from the National Spiritual Assembly, a letter from them, as well as maybe some writings from different James Baldwin and things like that. And so I would like to have some volunteers for readers who would read each slide as we go through. Don't be shy. Fran, okay. Anyone else? I just need 2 and we can alternate. Anybody else would like to read?
I will.
Thank you.
Anyway.
Thank you, Meliway. Let me go ahead and share the screen. So I have 3 slides. We talked about this excerpt last time that we were here together. And so I have 3 slides that we're going to read and then we're going to discuss. So Meliway, would you like to start? And then Fran, and we can just go back and forth.
I can do that.
Thank you.
He asked me if we had the teachings on that and if we read them. And I said, they read them. Then he said, do the American Baha'is realize the vital need of this? And I said, Shoghi Effendi, I'm afraid not. I think the Baha'is of America love Shoghi Effendi very much. And when they feel the depth of his desire along this line, they will carry out his desire. When I said that to him, I felt it was true. Here is one thing that Shoghi Effendi said: nobody can solve somebody else's problem.
You cannot see with a colored man's eyes. You see our complexion, but you don't know our hearts, our difficulties. And I am bombed in Somerville. And if I am bombed in Somerville, you don't believe Boston could do such a thing. Our family passed through that. You don't know the colored man's problems. If you don't, how can you solve them alone? Shoghi Effendi has laid great emphasis on that point, and he said finally, because of this one fact, every committee should have someone at least colored Baha'i, even though you have to use one over and over again, because you don't know the colored man's problems.
In the times of slavery, there were good people who solved these problems. But in this day, the colored people want to have something to say about his problems. And when he finds he can come and talk to you about his problems, then and only then will you be able to adjust them. Shoghi Effendi talked much about that. And he said he hoped that on every committee there would be a colored person. I said, but Shoghi Effendi, when we get together to elect these members, we assemble in prayer, seeking divine guidance, and we cast our votes, and we try to follow and obey. What else can we do? He said, study the needs of the cause, and then you will know that the need of the cause is that the Negro be represented, that he might express his viewpoint, that you might understand his position, that we might reach across this chasm and study it and know the need and know the needs. Don't go at things blindly. I'm sorry, I had to adjust the pictures back and forth and up and down to be able to see.
No problem. Thank you so much for reading. So as we keep this in mind, I would like us to read one more slide, which is an excerpt from the letter of the National Spiritual Assembly. And the reason why I want to combine it with what we just read right now is because it's really a call to action by the National Spiritual Assembly that falls right in line with what Shoghi Effendi was asking the Baha'is of the United States. And so Fran, would you please read the next slide, and then we'll come back and talk about all of this together.
To create a just society begins with recognition of the fundamental truth that humanity is one, but it is not enough simply to believe this in our hearts. It creates the moral imperative to act and to view all aspects of our personal, social, and institutional lives through the lens of justice. It implies a reordering of our society more profound than anything we have yet achieved. And it requires the participation of Americans of every race and background, for it is only through such inclusive participation that new moral and social directions can emerge. Whatever immediate results might come from the current demonstrations, the elimination of racism will require a sustained and concerted effort. It is one thing to protest against particular forms of injustice. It is a far more profound challenge to create a new framework for justice. Our efforts can only succeed when we learn to build relationships with each other based on sincere friendship, regard, and trust, which in turn become pillars for the activities of our institutions and communities. It is essential for us to join hands in a process of learning how to create models of what we want to see in every dimension of American life as we learn to apply the principle of oneness through practical engagement and experience. To this end, we offer the following thoughts. An essential element of the process will be honest and truthful discourse about current conditions and their causes, and understanding, in particular, the deeply entrenched notions of anti-Blackness that pervade our society. We must build the capacity to truly hear and acknowledge the voices of those who have directly suffered from the effects of racism. This capacity should manifest itself in our schools, the media, and other civic arenas, as well as in our work and personal relations. This should not end with words, but lead to meaningful, constructive action.
Thank you, Fran. And so, and I'm happy to go back and forth. I'm going to stop sharing the screen in just a minute. But with the questions that I'm going to post in the chat that I would like us to focus on, as we know, we are reading Sadie Oglesby's address. And the purpose here is really to think about how we can move from study to action. And so focusing on these two questions that we have here, if we can focus our discussion around that, that would be really fruitful. And so the two questions are, what are some ways in which you are building capacity to truly hear and acknowledge the voices of those who have directly suffered the effects of racism at the individual, community, and institutional level? What are some examples of meaningful, constructive action that arose from listening to those who have directly suffered the effects of racism? I'm going to just give you a couple seconds to think about these questions, and then we'll do the usual. I'll stop sharing and post it in the chat for us to think about. And I can go back to other slides. I know we read 4 slides total. All right, just give me 1 second as I copy these questions. There we go. Okay, so the questions are in the chat. So friends, thinking about Sadie Oglesby's address and her words, I think that last slide was so pertinent when we're thinking about what Shoghi Effendi was sharing, and the importance of listening and hearing from those who are suffering, and thinking about what the NSA is asking us to do. So maybe we can share.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I just want to encourage the friends to not get caught up in the past, what they may or may not have done, and have a forward-looking orientation. I mean, the past is past, however imperfect one has been. What can we do going forward?
Thank you. So I saw Chuck's hand was raised, and then Kathy.
Thank you, Liz. I was thinking about the line in the quotation from the NSA just before what you put up, where they mentioned relationships as being the pillars for institutions and communities. And I honestly think, and it's really been a thought that's been stronger and stronger in me lately, is that relationships are the revolution. Relationships, true relationships, that web of relationship, and that is where the listening occurs. That is where the learning can occur. Just as Sadie Oglesby said, that it was a relationship with her teachers, that she was watching them very carefully, but it was a relationship, and she was very keen to be sure that they didn't go off track. That they didn't go off duty at any point. And I think it must, to me, they must have been listening to her. I mean, why else would she react as she did to the faith and all that? They must have been really good listeners and learners, and seeing her as someone that they were in true relationship with. So that's what I just it takes me back to relationship.
The idea of building relationships, and how through those relationships we can hear and listen in a way that is different in other types of settings. Yeah. Kathy?
Building on what has already been said, one thing that comes to mind that I've observed is when we are listening to the voices of people of African descent, it is important to just allow it to bathe our souls and our spirits as well as our intelligence, and to trust that what they are saying is their truthful, lived experience, and not go into trying to explain things away or justify or yes, but just let it sink in so that we can, if their experience is quite different than the majority's experience, we need to learn what that experience is so that we can accompany one another in this search for constructing a different world, a different society. And the second thing is at the community level. I'm talking right now about the Baha'i community. We need, if we're not hearing the voices of friends of African descent, we need to ask for them. We need to solicit them. We need to go after and find out from them, what are they experiencing in the Baha'i community, and listen to their truth and their experience and address their issues so that we create a welcoming Baha'i community that is not organized and led by white people, but is a partnership and a collective community that is built by and for all the members of the community. So all voices are heard, but sometimes we have to proactively ask for those voices when they are quiet or we're not hearing them. There's a reason why we're not hearing them. We need to hear them and we need to be proactive about it.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Maliwe?
Hey, can you put up that slide? It's a response from Sadie, where she says, nobody knows your problems. You are the one who knows your own problems.
This one?
Because I like that. It says nobody can solve somebody else's problem. And I believe in that because, yes, we have been trying to voice and let the people know about our problems all the way back from Martin Luther King through all these people who have voiced the problems of the Black people up to the riots and all. But without us telling the people by whatever means we can tell them, people will not understand, or they will not know that we don't like or what they are doing to us as Black people is not right. So I just want to say that I like what she said. Here is one thing that Shogil Fendi said. Oh, it's Shogil Fendi who said that. And I think somewhere Sadie did admit to that too, that we need to tell people about what we are going through. I agree with that statement.
Thank you for sharing that, Maliwe. So thinking about Diane, I see your hands up. So part of it is creating spaces, I think, where those voices can be heard. And I'm wondering if in any of the communities, because I know we're being joined by so many different communities, if you have any experiences at the individual level, at the community level, or at the institutional level where you have created spaces where voices can be heard. And then what I really love about the NSA's message, that last sentence, where they say that this capacity should manifest itself in our schools, the media, and other civic arenas, as well as our work in personal relations. This should not end with words, but lead to meaningful and constructive action. And so thinking about community building activities and the ways in which we can create spaces where voices are heard, then how is that then how does that move from hearing voices to then converting them to meaningful, meaningful constructive action. And so if you have experiences or ideas, and as Dr. Harvey was mentioning, thinking about moving forward, even thinking about moving forward and how we can move forward. Yes, Diane.
Thanks, Liz. To speak to that question that you were asking about community and institutional efforts to build this capacity, back in June of 2020, the Cary Spiritual Assembly started a weekly deepening on the compilations from the Universal House of Justice about racial justice and race unity, which Chuck Edgerton and Bob James have graciously facilitated for the last 9 months, and it's still ongoing. And these weekly deepenings have become a wonderful opportunity for people to listen and learn about the issue of racial justice and African Americans' issues in America. So that's a community and institutional effort that I think has been very successful, in my opinion. I wanted to say something too on the individual level about building capacity. And I'd like to speak here from a white perspective, which is that many of us have ingrained historical issues that we are not even aware that we have. And it takes a while to empty ourselves of this. We need the ability to talk and express ourselves and empty ourselves of some of these negative preconceptions and ideas. It's a form of ignorance, really, that before we're able to actually learn and listen to somebody else, we have to rid ourselves of these preconceived ideas. For instance, I'm not racist, I don't do, and then yet you come out with something that maybe sounds racist. And it's like, oh my God. So there's that process that I think within the white community needs to happen before we're fully capable of really listening. And I think that's what the National Spiritual Assembly was talking about in terms of building capacity. And sometimes it needs to start at a very basic level. And so I don't know if there needs to be, little groups of white people who kind of deal with their issues. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but it's been very helpful for me to attend those weekly deepening sessions on Wednesdays. And then I've also started a Wilmette Institute course on anti-Black racism in the United States. And that's just getting started here this week. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you for sharing. I think, this is the ongoing debate that happens in so many different spaces is, is it what's the saying, chicken or the egg? Which one comes first in terms of, do we act, do we learn? And to be quite honest, I think personally in my own experience, which is just my own experience and different people experience things differently. The most learning that I've had is through action. And through failure, meaning I act, I mess up, someone holds me accountable, I learn from it. And because often what happens around in white spaces or with white people specifically, including me, is that we're scared to talk, we're scared to act because we're worried we're going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. But the reality is we're not going to learn until we make those mistakes. Learning is through failure, kind of like thinking about, within the Baha'i framework, it's learning through action. And so until we act, we cannot learn from our mistakes. And so being able to embrace this idea of courage and being brave in the sense that I mess up more than I actually don't mess up. you know, and I get pushback all the time for all the things that I say wrong or the things that I do wrong. And what I take from that is that it's learning. And every time I make a mistake, I'm able to then get back up and face it and work through it and continue trying to do the work. And so what I would ask the friends is to figure out how can we be braver? And it's not easy at all, you know, but
Yeah,
thinking about, yes, yeah.
yeah, the House of Justice, as I understand it, challenge us to embrace this humble posture of learning. I think that we all have our biases. I mean, you know, and we'll probably have biases until the day we leave here. We can strive to be better. And you can't have relationships without having trust. I mean, if I was to ask Cynthia the color of her top here, I mean, she'll tell me it's a what? What kind of top you have on? What color is it?
Probably turquoise, I guess.
The turquoise. Now, if I try to get into her business and I ask her to share something, you know, personal, she's less reluctant to share that without this trust. Uh, um, so we, you know, success does not breed success. Failure breeds success. And we have to learn how to fall forward. It's okay. I think the worst thing we can do is to have a fear of trying. Be like Nike and just do it. If it doesn't work out, well, you get better at it. And we had this humble posture of learning. So what? Do it. And by the way, I think that's for Black folk as well as white folk.
Yeah, thank you. That's so inspiring. Yes, Cynthia?
All right. Well, since I had to speak, I think one of the elements that was just mentioned is the idea of trust. So if I do open up and tell you my story, it's not for you to go tell and share with everybody else, you know, or for you to put me on the spot some other time and say, oh, well, remember you said this about your grandchildren. And then, you know, it's like, no, I'm sharing this with you because at whatever occasion it is, I feel like I can trust you. And I feel like you really want to know something about me. But it's not now, oh, now I've got somebody's story I can share with you. Look how sad this is. And look, I mean, you know, then you feel like you're just being used as an object. You know, it's not like that you care at all about me and my feelings. So I really, I mean, so we're talking about that posture of learning, and I just have been hurt that way. And I think we have to all be very conscious of that.
You know, I just wanted to say that's a really good point that you made. One of the things that it was suggested to me by someone who does dialogue on race relations as a living. That's how she makes her living. And I was having a discussion group on DNA, which of course ultimately for some led to race. And the room erupted in absolute chaos. And so I called her and asked her what can I do? And she said the first thing is to set the stage. And then she had a list of guidelines. And one of the things in the guidelines that reminded me of what you were saying for participants' protection in discussing personal things, is that if you commit to these guidelines, which one of them is you don't share what people say in the class, and that you don't react, that you don't crosstalk, things like that. And that made a lot of difference, but a lot of people had a problem with the guidelines. And so they just dropped out. And if they're not willing to be respectful of other people's, process or feelings, then, I mean, that's okay.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
Kathy,
yeah.
go ahead.
I just hope we heard what Cynthia Hall said.
Mhm.
Cynthia, do you feel heard?
I don't have any reason not to at this stage. I know several people here, but I live over in High Point, so there's a lot of people I don't know. But I would think that in the group discussion, I mean, what Lisa reinforced is that it is the responsibility of the group to establish ground rules and that everybody knows what they are. As Baha'is, we also have the idea that we shouldn't be backbiting, and how that is such, I mean, backbiting is a part of the American society. Our newspapers feed off of it. I mean, there's a whole industry related to backbiting.
Yeah.
So things we do and say, we might not think of it as backbiting, but I think if we really study that and what it means too, that will help us to deepen really that sense of trust and that the confidentiality that should go into our groups. And it's especially important. I think like you had a friend that you could call and get some quick ground rules because you knew them. But it's also important to realize when we're going into these discussions that we let the group set ground rules. I mean, but we can help guide that and whoever's facilitating that. And we can bring in, fortunately, it's great when we're in a religious environment because we have the guidance from our faith that we can share. So we can find some inspiring quotes. We can find that to set the spiritual tone. And then we can also, now from that, what are our practical guidelines that we're going to use here as we respect each other?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I wanted to say something, Liz. I posted
Yes.
something there, maybe a thing on the chat, and that is, it's going on the social media. It's really saying white superiority can only be resolved when white people see it as a problem they need to resolve, they need to solve, rather than a Black problem they need to empathize. But I expanded it a little more. I think it has to do with racism itself, that we can only need to solve it when white people see it as a problem they need to resolve. And at face value, it might seem like, when you look at it, it might look like, but what do you mean? Every part, everybody has a responsibility. Yeah, that is so true. But I think when you look deeper, then that is when, even in what we are trying to say here, when a Black sister or brother has to say what they are going through. And is it, to me, then that brings up the reflection. Am I saying it so I am being empathized with, or am I saying it so that you begin to solve this problem too? And ideally, I would like to see, because I've heard a whole lot, of, in white spaces, or my well-meaning friends who are saying, we don't deal with this in our circles. We don't deal with this in our community. We don't deal with That is how deep it is. A Black person is not saying this story out of themselves, right? Racism is being done to them. So by society, but most important, by the white counterpart of the society, whether it's in their systems or in the, in the society structure or in the personal relationship. I think we fall so much into that personal one, the one-on-one space, which I think that is not, as a Black person, I can tell you that that is not what really applies here. I would feel I'm taken care of where I know in the white places they are talking about this, I want to solve it. I will feel it. I don't even need to be wanting to tell my story. And the other aspect that I wanted to talk about, the NSA really has done a really good job, is on the US Baha'i website right now. They talked about the Black History Month and how much, we need to start getting away of eulogizing the Black experience, the Black suffering, and all this awakening about it. It's the history even like. But it is, to me, it's a getaway space when we go down to that nitty-gritty personal space, tell your story and I empathize. We are missing the big thing that needs to be resolved when we do that. That's what I'm saying. But I encourage everybody to what the NSA has done. It's a very beautiful historical analysis of what us as the Baha'i community has been doing with race relations in America. I really got a whole lot of it. It put into perspective what we have been doing. Like I hear some questions about that, what we've been doing as a community, at the institution, the race amity conferences, right down what we're doing now in our community building process. It really ties everything so beautifully together.
Thank you, Elga, for sharing that. And so for those, I'm definitely going to go on the website and check out the Black History Month. I didn't know it was up, that the NSA has put something up. So thank you for sharing that. And so thinking about how we can solve these problems, Kathy, I know you've had your hand up for a while. I know you put it down, but I had called on you. And then Evelyn, I see your hand. So after Kathy, did you still want to say?
Yes, that is the spaces that can be created can be one-on-one, as has already been mentioned, but also at the institutional level. Spiritual assemblies can invite, for example, if there are African-American focused firesides or African-American focused study circles, assemblies can invite members of the whole study circle to come and consult with them to address issues so that institutions can be more enlightened about what are the significant issues that we want to address. An example might be, say we hear from a group of African Americans that the culture in a particular community is very white, and it's not infused with the spirit of all the different demographics, ethnicities, and racial groups that are within that community. How can we change the representation at feasts? How can we change the representation on our committees? How can we make sure that we have people of African descent everywhere in these spaces within a Baha'i community? And then on an individual level, those of us who are doing devotional gatherings, are we inviting, if we're white, are we aiming our devotional gatherings towards people of color in our neighborhoods? Are we meeting people of color in our neighborhoods? And for example, I've been doing a series on the oneness of humanity with a small group of neighbors who are Hispanic and of African descent. And I just invited another new neighbor who just moved in, who's African American. And the theme of the devotional gatherings is the oneness of humanity. And so right off the bat, when they're welcomed into the neighborhood and they're invited to a unity gathering, which is what I call my devotional gatherings, a unity gathering, they begin to see their friendly neighbors who care about the oneness of humanity. So these are just two examples at the institutional level and at the service level in devotional gatherings. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. And Evelyn, I'll call on you in just a sec. I just wanted to maybe repeat what I'm hearing first, and then just to kind of summarize what has been said so far. So I think Cynthia and Elga, 2 points that you were making that that really, for me, made me think about in terms of action. One is this idea of trust, that even though we're hearing and listening to the voices of the people of the eye, that we think about, and Friends of African Descent, that we think about how we can preserve the trust that is built in these relationships, and hear them, but also take those stories, even if we don't necessarily share them with others, and then think about how we can solve it. And from the solving perspective, I think what I hear Kathy also saying is that in every space, and what the NSA and Shogi Effendi was sharing, was that in every space we need Friends of African Descent, that we can't solve this problem until the voices and points of view of Friends of African Descent are within these spaces, so that we can move forward and solve them together. So I don't know, does that sound like what has been shared? Am I missing anything? Does anyone want to add anything to that? Okay. Evelyn?
I
Hi.
came to, hello, I am of African descent. Since you can't see me, it's early in the morning and I don't do mornings.
So glad you could join us.
I came to Asheboro about 5-6 years ago, I'm not even sure. And when I got here, I realized that I didn't know any Baha'is here. So I went online and they referred me to Chuck and Don. Well, I've gotten to know them. And you stated about setting guidelines. Without saying that I was stating a guideline, I told both of them, the best way to deal with me is just straight up, just talk to me as there was no color. And I feel when people do that and insert trust and get trust, it works a lot better. I can talk to them about anything, whether it's Baha'i or not. Sometimes they throw me under the bus, but they're good people and I love them. And I've told them this in private, not just here. I've told them how much I appreciate their friendship, their guidance, because I'm new to the Baha'i world. And I don't know a lot of anything when it comes to Baha'i. I'm healthcare. So I share what I have with them and they share what they have with me. I wouldn't trade them for anybody. That's what I think it's about.
Thank you so
Okay.
much. Thank you for sharing that.
Please, can I add just something you asked about what has been shared? I thought an important point also is that I think I'm hearing an inkling of that is our problem to resolve, and we're resolving an age-old lie that we have all been lied to, whether we are black or white. We've all lied to, and we have carried this in our communities, in our system for a long, long time that we need to begin to shed. I think, again, it's that shift from the black problem. It's the black problem, the black people's problem. So that if we are coming from that kind of posture, we don't need a black person in any cycle to begin to talk about it and resolve this. Because there is so much we need to peel off. Our whole historic, our whole worldview, we've been fed this in schools. Yeah, we don't need. Yeah, my child does not need to have a white friend to know this. So it should be likewise. My child doesn't have to be in a white school to know that. Likewise, a black child a white child should not need to have a black friend to begin to know that this exists. That, to me, that's where the problem, because it exists. It's our whole life, our worldview. It's a big lie that we need to begin to resolve it as that, one big lie.
Thank you for adding to that. I actually
Thank
have
you.
a couple quotes. Yes, I have a couple quotes from James Baldwin that also addresses what Elga is sharing, and I will share them later. Yes, Harvey, and then I'll call on Jackie.
Yeah, when we think about people of color in these United States, there are such pervasive disparities that are grounded in history. I mean, the crime and the criminal justice system. Um, um, my goodness, this guy said, what was his name? Charles King. He said that you have crippled a people and then blame them for limping. So there has to be some reasonable expectation of people, and is grown so deep. And when people say, "I understand," whites or whatever, it is such an insult, because you don't have a clue. Uh, um, but that should not. But that shouldn't prevent one from trying to mend the divide, if you will. Trust does not come easy, but there are such opportunities now, particularly with the major plan of God being accelerated the way it has, the opportunities for us to really raise high the minor plan, the banner of oneness, in this time. So I just hope we all, including myself, find new ways, new pathways of action. The world needs it.
Thank you for sharing that. Jackie?
Yes, thank you. Some of the things that I and several members of my close group of Baha'is have been doing is commenting, raising the issue. I'm a white person. I'm in a predominantly white, mostly Persian community. One of the things we've suggested is elevating the voices and representation of Black people and other people of color in our devotions. So what we're seeing is much of the music and some of the quotes from Sadie Oglesby and others are now being included in our gatherings. Another thing is telling people about the many opportunities of Baha'i communities in particular that are offering so many wonderful opportunities, like the Durham community, Los Angeles, many of the other communities that Van Gilmer has once a month for white people to go to and just listen, just learn by listening to what the experiences are from Black people, because they're truthful and they feel that they're in safe spaces to be able to share what's going on. That's such a learning experience. Another is using social media if you post something, one of the important things in terms of eradicating racism is bringing ourselves to understand the history in this country of the treatment, especially of Native Americans and enslaved people, Black people, as it continues today. Shining a light on some of that to just open people's eyes. And the last thing is the NSA sent a letter to local spiritual assemblies on January 25th with links to 3 videos from the Baha'i Office of Public Affairs. It was presented by 2 African Americans, and each of them is a component to me really of a path that we can do to develop our communities, ourselves individually, and our institutions. And it's so enlightening. It's one of the most hopeful things I've really seen lately. And I really highly recommend that people ask their assemblies if they haven't presented it to them yet. The reason I learned about it was because Hoda Hosseini had posted the letter and the links on her Iranian Baha'is against racial injustice. And it's just a very profound letter, and also those videos, just they're wonderful. So that's my suggestion.
Thank you, Jackie. Could you share that with me at some point, please?
Yeah, I'll look for that link, but I definitely will. It's something we all should have access to. Thanks.
Thank you. So dear friends, I know we're coming up. We have about 5 minutes. And so I don't know if there are any last comments that we would like to make. We have about 2 minutes before we wrap up with a song. I don't know if anybody would have any final thoughts on the questions that we were discussing. Yes, Cynthia. I can't hear you. Sorry.
Yeah, you had said you were going to hear quotes by James Baldwin.
Yes.
And I think there's so many books available today too, that everybody has access to so much knowledge that's been accumulated about this. There's so many tremendous writers on the scene today. I'm in the midst of reading Caste and discussing that with book groups. And Ta-Nehisi Coates, he does it he has some fiction, but in his book, The Water Dancer, he's got some nonfiction too. I mean, there's no reason that any of us can't educate ourselves, and then to find friends who are like-minded, regardless of what color their skin is, who want to discuss it, just because we'll deepen our understanding that way. And that's really profound.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Sam here.
Hi, Sam.
Yeah, I don't think we should forget about the importance of music in bringing people together. It's kind of like a universal language.
Yeah, music.
There's always been a back and forth between white and black in the music scene.
Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
So I know it seems like Chuck was asking in the chat for the James Baldwin quotes. I can just post them in the chat real quick, since we're running out of time. And hold on one second. You can check them out as I play one last song. I think ending on Cynthia's last comment, I think is great. So I appreciate everyone who has shared today. And I'm just grateful that we have these conversations. We're able to have these conversations. And as always, I always want to thank the Durham LSA for hosting the Sunday devotions and the space, and for allowing these conversations to always continue. So I hope that what you can take away from this session is thinking about all the suggestions that have been made and how we can move forward in action, with action in different ways.